August 19th, 1944. The rolling hills of eastern France stretched beneath a small, fragile-looking aircraft as it climbed into the morning sky. Inside the cramped cockpit of the Piper L-4 Grasshopper, Second Lieutenant Charles Carpenter gripped the control stick and scanned the horizon. His orders were clear and simple: conduct aerial reconnaissance, spot enemy positions, take photographs, and relay coordinates to artillery units. Do not engage. Do not attack. Just observe and report. But Charles Carpenter was not a man content with just watching. And on this particular morning, as he spotted a column of German armor moving toward Allied positions, he made a decision that would violate every protocol in the military handbook, earn him legendary status among American troops, and transform a defenseless observation plane into one of the most feared tank destroyers on the Western Front. The intelligence briefing that morning had been routine. German forces were regrouping after suffering heavy losses in the Falaise Pocket. General George Patton's Third Army was pushing eastward with incredible speed, but scattered pockets of German resistance remained dangerous. Panzer divisions, though diminished, still posed a serious threat to advancing American infantry. Artillery units needed precise coordinates. Reconnaissance pilots like Carpenter were supposed to provide those coordinates from safe altitudes, then return to base so the big guns could do the real work. Charles Carpenter had other plans. Before we continue deeper into this extraordinary story, I'd love to know where you're from and whether you've heard about this unconventional hero before. Drop a comment below letting me know what you think about pilots who bend the rules to win battles. And if you appreciate detailed military history told with accuracy and respect, please subscribe to this channel. These stories require serious research to get the facts right, and knowing you're out there makes every hour of work worthwhile. Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter was born on August 29th, 1912, in Edgington, Illinois, into a world still healing from the First World War. His childhood was typical of rural America during the Depression years, growing up in a farming community where hard work and self-reliance were survival skills, not abstract virtues. After graduating from high school, Carpenter pursued education, attending college, and eventually becoming a history teacher. By all accounts, he was a good teacher who cared about his students and took his work seriously. But beneath the quiet exterior of a small-town educator burned an adventurous spirit. Carpenter loved flying and had obtained his pilot's license before the war, spending weekends at local airfields learning to handle small civilian aircraft. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, Carpenter, like millions of American men, felt the immediate call to serve. At 29 years old, he was older than many volunteers, but age hadn't diminished his reflexes or his determination. In 1942, Charles Carpenter enlisted in the United States Army and volunteered for flight training. His civilian flying experience gave him an advantage, and he quickly proved himself capable during basic flight instruction. The Army commissioned him as a second lieutenant and, recognizing his skills with small aircraft, assigned him to artillery observation duty. This role, while important, was designed to keep pilots out of combat. Observation planes were unarmed, slow, and incredibly vulnerable. Their job was to see without being seen, to gather intelligence while avoiding confrontation. Carpenter arrived in France in July 1944, just weeks after the D-Day landings at Normandy. He was assigned to the 4th Armored Division under the command of Major General John Shirley Wood, which itself operated as part of General George Patton's Third Army. The 4th Armored Division had a reputation for aggressive tactics and rapid advances, perfectly matching Patton's philosophy of constant forward momentum. Carpenter's specific assignment placed him with an artillery battalion where his primary responsibility involved flying the L-4 Grasshopper, better known by its civilian designation as the Piper J-3 Cub. The L-4 Grasshopper was never designed for combat. Originally created as a civilian training and recreational aircraft, the military adapted it for liaison and observation duties. With a top speed of approximately 80 miles per hour, a service ceiling of around 11,500 feet, and absolutely no armor or defensive weapons, the L-4 represented everything a combat aircraft should not be. It weighed just over 1,000 pounds, fully loaded, had a fabric-covered fuselage that could be punctured by rifle fire, and carried only enough fuel for a few hours of flight. Military planners considered it useful precisely because it was small, slow, and unthreatening. German forces, focusing on more dangerous Allied aircraft, often ignored these small observation planes. But the L-4 had advantages that Carpenter immediately recognized. Its slow speed and excellent low-altitude handling meant it could fly close to the ground, following terrain and using trees and hills for concealment. Its small size made it difficult to spot from a distance, especially when flying at dawn or dusk. Most importantly, the aircraft's simple construction and minimal weight meant it could carry additional equipment if a pilot was creative enough to figure out how. During his first weeks in France, Carpenter performed his duties exactly as ordered. He would take off at dawn, fly predetermined routes over German-held territory, identify enemy positions, mark them on maps, and radio coordinates back to artillery batteries. The work was dangerous despite the plane's perceived harmlessness. German anti-aircraft fire could shred the fabric fuselage, and enemy fighters, when they bothered to engage such small targets, could shoot down an L-4 with contemptuous ease. Several observation pilots in Carpenter's unit had already been killed. Carpenter grew increasingly frustrated with his limited role. He would spot German tanks, armored vehicles, and troop concentrations, relay the information, and then watch helplessly as artillery barrages arrived minutes or sometimes hours later, often missing their targets because the enemy had moved. The delays inherent in the observation to artillery communication system meant that German forces could reposition before American guns could engage them effectively. Carpenter, with his teacher's analytical mind, understood that the system had a fundamental flaw. Too much time elapsed between intelligence gathering and action. The idea that would change everything came from observation of other pilots. In late July 1944, Carpenter heard rumors that some L-4 pilots in other units had begun experimenting with mounting weapons on their aircraft. The concept violated regulations, but combat has a way of making men creative when survival is at stake. Carpenter learned that at least one pilot had successfully attached a bazooka to his plane's wing struts and used it against ground targets. A bazooka, officially designated the M1A1 rocket launcher, was a shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon that fired a shape-charged warhead capable of penetrating approximately 3 inches of armor. American infantry used bazookas extensively against German tanks, but the weapon's effective range of only about 100 yards meant soldiers had to get dangerously close to their targets. Carpenter realized that mounting bazookas on an aircraft could solve this problem. From the air, he could approach German tanks from their most vulnerable angle, the top, where armor was thinnest, and fire from a safe distance before the enemy could react. Getting permission to modify his aircraft proved easier than expected. Carpenter approached his commanding officer with a straightforward proposal. Let him attach 2 bazookas to his L-4 and test whether the concept worked. His commander, aware that conventional methods weren't stopping German armor effectively enough, agreed to allow a trial. Working with an ordnance technician and the unit's crew chief, Carpenter designed a mounting system that attached M1A1 bazookas to the wing struts of his Grasshopper. The bazookas were wired directly into the cockpit, allowing Carpenter to fire them by flipping electrical switches. The first test flight in early August 1944 proved the concept viable but revealed limitations. 2 bazookas provided minimal firepower, and reloading between sorties took too long. Carpenter requested permission to add more launchers. His superiors, impressed by his initiative and recognizing the potential value, authorized the modifications. Eventually, Carpenter's L4 Grasshopper carried 6 M1A1 bazookas, 3 mounted on each wing strut. This configuration transformed the tiny observation plane into an improvised attack aircraft unlike anything else in the Allied arsenal. Carpenter named his aircraft Rosie the Rocketer, honoring the women working in American factories during the war. The name, painted on the fuselage, became famous among troops on the front lines, who watched in amazement as this small, seemingly defenseless plane dove on German tanks and destroyed them with rocket fire. The tactical approach Carpenter developed was both brilliant and terrifying. German tanks, particularly the feared Tiger and Panther models, had thick frontal armor that could withstand hits from most Allied anti-tank weapons. The top armor, designed primarily to protect against artillery airbursts, was significantly thinner. Carpenter exploited this weakness by attacking in steep dives, approaching from behind and above, firing his rockets at point-blank range, then pulling up sharply and escaping before German crews could react. The M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rounds that Carpenter fired from his bazookas were specifically designed to penetrate armor through shaped charge technology. Upon impact, the warhead created a superheated jet of metal that could burn through armor plate, disabling engines, igniting fuel, and killing crew members. Against the thin-top armor of German tanks, these rockets were devastatingly effective. Carpenter's first combat kill came on August 19, 1944, during a routine reconnaissance mission. He had been ordered to photograph German positions near a small French village when he spotted a column of German tanks moving toward Allied lines. Standard procedure dictated that he should mark the position, radio coordinates, and return to base. Artillery would handle the rest. Instead, Carpenter descended to attack altitude, lined up his approach, and dove toward the leading tank. At approximately 100 meters above the ground, he fired 2 rockets. Both struck the tank's engine compartment. The vehicle erupted in flames as its fuel ignited. German soldiers scattered, confused about where the attack had originated. By the time they looked up, Carpenter had already climbed away, banking hard to line up another attack run. The second tank exploded moments later. The third began turning, trying to bring its main gun to bear on the small aircraft, but Carpenter's dive angle kept him above the tank's depression limit. The turret couldn't elevate high enough to target him. He fired again, and another German tank died. The engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When Carpenter returned to base, he reported destroying 3 tanks and damaging 2 others. His superiors were initially skeptical until artillery-forward observers confirmed the kills. German forces had abandoned the advance, losing 5 tanks to a single unarmed observation plane. News of the attack spread rapidly through the 4th Armored Division. Soldiers who had been fighting German armor for months with limited success suddenly had a secret weapon, a history teacher from Illinois flying a fabric-covered Piper Cub loaded with bazookas. The nickname Bazooka Charlie emerged immediately, and Carpenter embraced it. Over the following weeks, Carpenter flew multiple combat sorties daily. His tactics evolved as German forces learned to fear the small observation planes they had previously ignored. German commanders issued orders to fire on any L-4 Grasshopper immediately upon sighting, recognizing that these aircraft might not be harmless observers anymore. This made Carpenter's missions more dangerous, but he adapted by flying even lower, using terrain masking and attacking at dawn or dusk when visibility was poor. One engagement in September 1944 demonstrated Carpenter's extraordinary courage and skill. German forces had launched a counterattack against American positions spearheaded by a company of tanks. Artillery requests had been submitted, but the guns were engaged elsewhere. Infantry units, armed only with bazookas and anti-tank grenades, were taking heavy casualties. Carpenter took off without waiting for orders. Flying at treetop level, he approached the battlefield from an unexpected direction, coming in low over a ridgeline that concealed his approach until the last moment. German tank commanders, focused on the American infantry to their front, never saw him coming. Carpenter destroyed 2 tanks on his first pass. He circled back immediately, ignoring heavy machine gun fire that tore through his aircraft's fabric covering. On his second pass, he destroyed another tank and damaged 2 more. The German advance stalled as commanders, unable to determine where the attacks were coming from, ordered their remaining tanks to retreat. American infantry counterattacked, exploiting the confusion, and recaptured lost ground. When Carpenter landed, mechanics counted over 40 bullet holes in his aircraft. Fabric hung in strips from the wings. The engine had been grazed by machine gun fire. Carpenter was uninjured but exhausted. After a quick meal, and while mechanics patched his aircraft, he took off again for another mission. His most audacious action occurred during an engagement that earned him the Silver Star, America's 3rd highest military decoration for valor in combat. German forces had fortified a small French town that stood directly on the route of the American advance. Taking the town conventionally would have cost heavy casualties. Patton's Third Army was behind schedule, and delays were unacceptable. Carpenter volunteered to conduct a reconnaissance mission to identify German positions. Flying over the town at low altitude, he spotted German tanks positioned behind stone buildings, anti-tank guns covering the main approach roads, and infantry dug into defensive positions. Standard reconnaissance protocol required him to photograph the positions and return for debriefing. Instead, Carpenter landed his aircraft in a field just behind American lines, borrowed a rifle from an infantryman, and walked directly to the commander of the nearest tank company. He told the commander exactly where every German position was located and announced that he was going to destroy the German tanks. When the American tanks heard his attack, they should advance immediately into the town. The tank commander, initially skeptical, agreed to coordinate with Carpenter after confirming his reputation. Minutes later, Carpenter was airborne again, diving toward the German-occupied town. He destroyed 2 tanks on his first attack run. The explosions panicked German defenders who thought they were under artillery attack. American tanks, hearing the explosions, began their advance. Carpenter made 3 more attack runs, destroying German anti-tank positions and creating chaos in the enemy defenses. American forces captured the town within minutes, encountering minimal resistance because German troops, unable to understand how their carefully prepared positions had been compromised so quickly, assumed they were being attacked by overwhelming force and retreated. After landing, Carpenter was immediately placed under arrest. During the attack, he had spotted what he believed was a German vehicle and had directed an American tank to fire on it. The vehicle turned out to be American, and though no one was injured, Carpenter had technically given orders to another unit despite not being that unit's commander. Military regulations prohibited such actions, and Carpenter faced the possibility of a court-martial. General George Patton personally intervened. When informed of the incident and Carpenter's overall combat record, Patton reportedly said Carpenter was exactly the kind of fighting man I want in my army. Not only did Patton dismiss the charges, but he also awarded Carpenter the Silver Star for exceptional valor and initiative in combat. From August through December 1944, Charles Carpenter flew over 600 combat missions. His confirmed tank kills numbered at least 14, though some reports suggest the actual number was higher. German commanders, realizing that small observation planes had become deadly threats, diverted resources to shoot him down. This inadvertently benefited Allied forces because German anti-aircraft units that targeted L-4 Grasshoppers were units that weren't targeting bombers, fighters, or ground attack aircraft. Carpenter's success inspired other artillery observation pilots to arm their aircraft. Several pilots in other divisions mounted bazookas on their L-4 Grasshoppers, creating an informal squadron of tank destroyers. However, none achieved the same level of success as Carpenter, whose combination of flying skill, tactical intelligence, and sheer audacity made him unique. His missions took a physical toll, flying at low altitude through enemy fire, pulling high-G maneuvers to avoid anti-aircraft fire, and conducting multiple sorties daily exhausted him. The psychological strain of repeatedly diving toward tanks, whose crews were desperately trying to kill him, wore on his nerves. Several times his aircraft sustained damage that should have forced him down permanently, but Carpenter and his maintenance crew kept Rosie the rocketer flying through improvisation and determination. In late 1944, Carpenter was assigned additional responsibilities as General John Wood's personal pilot. This role should have removed him from combat, but Carpenter continued flying attack missions whenever possible. His superiors, recognizing his value and reluctant to ground him despite the risks, allowed him to continue operating with unusual independence. The German military's reaction to Carpenter and pilots like him was significant. German intelligence reports from late 1944 noted the appearance of armed American observation aircraft and warned commanders to treat all small planes as potential threats. This forced German forces to expend ammunition and attention on targets they had previously ignored, further straining their already depleted resources. Charles Carpenter's war ended in December 1944 as Allied forces consolidated positions before the Battle of the Bulge. He had survived months of combat that killed many pilots, destroyed countless aircraft, and pushed men to their psychological breaking points. Carpenter returned to the United States in early 1945, having flown more combat missions than almost any other artillery observation pilot in the European theater. After the war, Carpenter returned to teaching, resuming his career as a high school history instructor. He rarely spoke publicly about his combat experiences, preferring to let his actions speak through the official records and the memories of the soldiers whose lives he had saved. He married, raised a family, and lived quietly in Illinois until his death in 1986. The story of Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter reveals essential truths about warfare, innovation, and individual initiative in combat. Military hierarchies exist for good reasons, maintaining order and coordinating complex operations across vast theaters. But rigidity in military thinking can cost lives. Carpenter recognized the tactical problem, developed an unconventional solution, and implemented it despite violating standard procedures. His actions saved American lives and destroyed enemy equipment that conventional methods might have missed. The L-4 Grasshopper was never intended to be a combat aircraft. Military engineers designed it for observation, liaison, and light transport. No weapons, no armor, no combat role whatsoever. Yet Carpenter transformed this defenseless plane into one of the most feared tank destroyers on the Western Front through creativity, skill, and courage. His story demonstrates that innovation in warfare doesn't always come from laboratories and design bureaus. Sometimes it comes from a pilot who refuses to accept limitations and sees possibilities where others see only restrictions. Consider the psychological impact on German forces. Tanks were supposed to be dominant weapons on the battlefield, protected by thick armor and powerful guns. German tank crews trained to fight enemy tanks, anti-tank guns, and ground attack aircraft. They never trained to defend against tiny observation planes carrying bazookas. When Carpenter attacked, German crews experienced a moment of cognitive dissonance. Their training had not prepared them for this threat, and that moment of confusion often meant the difference between survival and destruction. The tactical innovation Carpenter pioneered had broader implications. His success proved that unconventional weapons platforms could be effective against armored targets if employed creatively. This lesson influenced post-war military thinking about close air support, anti-armor tactics, and the value of light aircraft in combat roles. Modern attack helicopters, which routinely engage tanks using rockets and missiles, owe their doctrinal foundation partly to pilots like Carpenter, who demonstrated that aircraft didn't need to be heavily armed or armored to destroy ground targets effectively. The story also illuminates the character of soldiers who win wars. Carpenter was a teacher, not a professional warrior. He had no formal military training beyond what the Army provided during wartime. Yet he understood combat instinctively, recognized problems, developed solutions, and executed plans with extraordinary skill. History often focuses on generals and grand strategy, but wars are won by individuals who make critical decisions in crucial moments. Carpenter made those decisions repeatedly, choosing to engage when regulations said to observe, choosing to attack when orders said to photograph, choosing to risk his life when safety lay in following procedures. General Patton's decision to support Carpenter rather than punish him reveals another crucial aspect of military leadership. Patton understood that winning required flexibility, that combat demanded initiative, and that exceptional soldiers sometimes broke rules for good reasons. A lesser commander might have court-martialed Carpenter for insubordination. Patton recognized genius when he saw it and protected one of his most effective warriors from bureaucratic consequences. The technological aspect deserves examination. The M1A1 bazooka was a relatively simple weapon, reliable and effective, but requiring close range to be useful. Infantry armed with bazookas had to get within 100 yards of enemy tanks, exposing themselves to machine gun fire and main gun rounds. Carpenter's innovation extended the bazooka's effective range by mounting it on an aircraft and attacking from above. This simple modification transformed the good weapon into an exceptional one by changing how it was employed. Modern military forces have institutionalized the lessons that Carpenter taught through improvisation. Close air support aircraft now train specifically for anti-armor roles. Attack helicopters carry sophisticated anti-tank missiles. Unmanned aerial vehicles conduct reconnaissance and strike missions simultaneously. All of these capabilities trace their conceptual origins to pilots like Carpenter, who proved that small aircraft could destroy large targets if tactics were sound and pilots were skilled. The human cost of war appears throughout Carpenter's story. Every tank he destroyed represented German soldiers killed or wounded. Every mission he flew risked his own life. The soldiers he protected from German attacks went on to fight more battles where some of them died. War has no clean victories, only necessary actions taken in defense of values worth protecting. Carpenter understood this, which perhaps explains why he spoke little about his combat experiences after the war ended. Teachers understand that some lessons are too heavy to share casually. The nickname Bazooka Charlie became legendary among troops of the 3rd Army and 4th Armored Division. Soldiers who had never met Carpenter knew his name and his reputation. When they saw an L-4 Grasshopper overhead, they felt safer, knowing that if German tanks appeared, that tiny plane might be their salvation. Morale matters in combat, and Carpenter provided both practical assistance and psychological reassurance to ground forces who faced German armor with inadequate weapons. Looking back across 8 decades, Charles Carpenter's actions during the summer and fall of 1944 exemplify the finest traditions of American military service. He volunteered when his country needed defenders. He learned skills required for his mission. He identified problems and developed solutions. He led by example, never asking others to take risks he wouldn't take himself. He succeeded through skill and courage, not through overwhelming resources or superior technology. And after the war, he returned to civilian life without seeking glory or recognition for his service. The story of the teacher who became a tank destroyer, the observer who became an attacker, the man who flew an unarmed plane into combat and emerged victorious, deserves to be remembered, not just as an interesting footnote to World War II history, but as an example of American innovation, courage, and determination in combat. Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter received orders to take photographs and relay coordinates. Instead, he strapped rockets to his plane and went hunting for tanks. That decision violated regulations, defied conventional military thinking, and saved countless American lives. Today, restored L-4 Grasshoppers fly at air shows, reminding crowds of the tiny aircraft that once dominated battlefields. Military museums display bazookas behind glass, explaining their role in infantry combat. But few exhibits mention Charles Carpenter or the dozens of German tanks he destroyed while flying a plane that wasn't supposed to fight. His story, like so many stories of individual heroism from that war, survives primarily in military records, unit histories, and the fading memories of veterans who witnessed his exploits. This is how wars are truly won, not through grand strategies alone, but through individuals who see problems and refuse to accept that nothing can be done. Not through superior technology, but through creative employment of available resources. Not through following orders blindly, but through understanding the intent behind orders and achieving objectives through unexpected means. Charles Carpenter understood all of this instinctively. He never wrote a book about his experiences. He never toured the country giving speeches. He returned to teaching children about history, knowing he had made history himself. They ordered him to just take photos. He bombed an armored division instead. And in doing so, 2nd Lieutenant Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter proved that courage, skill, and innovation matter more than regulations, that small aircraft can destroy big tanks, and that sometimes the best military decision is the one that breaks all the rules.